The warm glow of lanterns hung from the wooden beams, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the bustling tavern. The air buzzed with laughter and lively chatter as soldiers in their uniforms, with dirt still clinging to their boots, mingled with townsfolk looking for escape from their daily routines. The smell of roasted meats and freshly baked bread wafted through the room, making mouths water and stomachs growl. In one corner, a group of soldiers shared tales of bravery from the battlefield, each story growing taller and more outrageous than the last. Their voices rose above the clinking of mugs and the crackling of the fireplace, creating a symphony of camaraderie that echoed through every nook and cranny of the bar. Townspeople leaned in closer, eager to listen, while a few daring souls challenged the soldiers to arm wrestling matches, laughter erupting every time someone fell short. At a long wooden table, a musician strummed a lively tune on his lute, encouraging some patrons to join in song. The toes of boots tapped in rhythm, and even the most serious faces couldn't help but crack a smile. It was a night for revelry, where worries faded like smoke into the night air. In stark contrast to this lively scene, stood a solitary figure near the bar's entrance. She was tall and confident, dressed in simple but sturdy clothing that hinted at a life spent in the wild rather than among cities. Her dark hair framed her face, and her piercing gaze scanned the room with quiet determination. Though she seemed out of place amidst the raucous laughter, there was an air about her that suggested untold stories and hidden strength. As she stepped further inside, some heads turned in curiosity. A few whispers floated through the crowd, wondering who she was and what brought her to this rowdy gathering. The general, known for his loud voice and even louder opinions, spotted her from across the room. With a grin spreading across his face like wildfire, he leaned over to his comrades and began to make light of her presence. "Look at her," he boomed, his voice cutting through the din. "What brave soul would dare enter our domain?" The laughter erupted again, but this time it felt different, a mix of amusement and intrigue that hinted at something more beneath the surface of their jests. The woman merely smiled faintly, unperturbed by the mockery that swirled around her like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. The general, a tall and imposing figure, was the life of the party. His laughter boomed like thunder, reverberating off the tavern walls as he held court among his fellow soldiers and townsfolk. Clad in a crisp military uniform adorned with medals, he wore his bravado like a badge of honor, his chest puffed out with pride. Everywhere he went, conversations paused to make way for his presence, and eyes turned to him with both admiration and amusement. With a quick wit and a sharp tongue, the general relished the chance to entertain. He often recounted tales from the battlefield, embellishing his stories until they became legends in their own right. "And then I single-handedly took down 3 enemy soldiers," he would declare, gesturing dramatically with his arms. The crowd would erupt in laughter and applause, captivated by his charisma and charm. It was as if he could weave magic with words, pulling everyone into his world of heroism and adventure. Yet beneath this larger-than-life persona lay a man who thrived on attention and validation. His sarcasm was as sharp as his sword, often aimed at those he deemed unworthy or weak. As he spotted the confident woman across the room, a spark of mischief ignited within him. "Look at her!" he bellowed to his companions, pointing her out with exaggerated flair. "What brave soul dares to wander into our merry chaos? Surely she must have lost her way." The room filled with laughter once more as the patrons turned to look at her. The general's jests were like arrows aimed straight at her heart, meant to draw out a reaction that would entertain the crowd. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed triumphantly, enjoying this moment of spotlight as if it were an award given only to him. As he continued to mock her presence, something shifted in the atmosphere. The laughter had a peculiar edge. It was no longer just playful teasing but held an undercurrent of challenge. The general's bravado seemed to mask an excitement, a thrill that came from testing limits and seeing how far he could push someone before they snapped back. Little did he know that this woman was unlike anyone he had encountered before. Her calm demeanor amidst the ridicule hinted at a story waiting to unfold, one that could shake even the most confident general from his pedestal. As the general held court with his stories of valor, the heavy wooden door creaked open, and a gust of cool night air swept through the tavern. All eyes turned towards the entrance as a woman stepped into the warm glow of the lanterns. She stood tall and proud, her presence commanding attention, even amid the lively chaos of laughter and tales. Her long dark hair flowed down her back like a river of shadows, contrasting sharply with the bright colors of her simple yet sturdy clothing. The bustle of conversation quieted for just a moment, with patrons glancing at one another in curiosity. Whispers floated through the crowd like butterflies on a breeze, each person wondering who she was and what had brought her to their raucous gathering. There was something mysterious about her, a hint of danger in her calm demeanor, that intrigued and unsettled them all. She scanned the room with keen, piercing eyes that seemed to take in every detail. The way she held herself spoke volumes. Her posture was straight, shoulders back, exuding an air of confidence that contrasted sharply with the rowdy laughter around her. It was as if she were an eagle surveying a meadow full of unsuspecting prey. The general's mocking laughter faded into mere background noise as she walked further inside, each step purposeful and deliberate. Seated at their tables were patrons who had lived their lives mostly in the safety of town. They were used to familiar faces and predictable routines. Yet this woman carried with her an aura of something wild and untamed, a suggestion that she might have lived outside the comforts of civilization for far too long. Scars from battles fought or journeys taken might be hidden beneath her clothing, each telling a story that remained untold. As she approached the bar, some soldiers exchanged nervous glances while others leaned in closer, trying to catch snippets of conversation among themselves. The general's eyes sparked with interest. He sensed an opportunity for entertainment and intrigue. "What brings you here?" he called out, his bravado returning as he attempted to assert his dominance. The woman turned slowly to face him, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. In that moment, it became clear. She was not intimidated by the general or his mockery. Instead, she seemed ready to engage in whatever challenge lay ahead. Little did they know, her past was etched in every confident step she took, an untold saga waiting for the right moment to unfold. The general leaned back in his chair, a smirk stretching across his face as he eyed the woman approaching the bar. Sensing the crowd's curiosity, he saw an opportunity to showcase his wit. With a flourish, he raised his mug and proclaimed, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brave soul among us. I think she must have taken a wrong turn on her way to the nearest knitting circle." His laughter rang out, and several patrons joined in, their chuckles mingling with the crackling fire. The woman paused for a moment, her expression unchanged as she assessed the general. The amusement in the tavern swelled, but she didn't flinch or retaliate. Instead, she continued toward the bar with an air of quiet confidence that seemed to puzzle and intrigue the crowd even more. Perhaps she's here looking for a new hobby, the general continued, pushing his advantage. I hear hunting wild boars is all the rage. Maybe she'll share tips on how to catch one with nothing but that sweet smile of hers. The laughter that followed was louder this time, echoing through the room as soldiers slapped their knees and pointed at her. Patrons exchanged glances, caught between laughter and unease. Some found amusement in the general's antics, while others felt a twinge of sympathy for the woman who stood unmoved by the mocking jabs. She was clearly no stranger to attention, but it was uncertain if she welcomed this particular kind. "Look at her posture," he exclaimed dramatically. "Clearly ready for battle, but I suspect her greatest fight is deciding between tea or ale." The laughter erupted again, and for a moment, it seemed as if nothing could face him down. He reveled in this moment of dominance, blissfully unaware of how his jests were drawing sharper lines in the air. But instead of stepping back or growing angry, the woman merely tilted her head slightly, almost playfully. The general's words rolled off her like water off a duck's back. She carried herself with a sense of purpose and honor that made many wonder what lay beneath her calm facade. As he continued to poke fun at her appearance and demeanor, something began to shift within the crowd. A few patrons exchanged worried looks. They began to sense that this was not merely a game, but rather a test of wills that could easily take an unexpected turn. The general had thrown down the gauntlet without realizing it, and still, she stood tall, ready for whatever challenge awaited her. As the general's laughter echoed through the tavern, the woman continued her approach toward the bar, her demeanor barely changing. The mocking words bounced off her as if they were nothing more than harmless raindrops. She kept her head high and her gaze steady, showing no signs of anger or frustration. Her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. This wasn't the first time she had encountered arrogance, but something about this moment felt different. With each playful jab from the general, she could feel the weight of the room's attention upon her. While some patrons laughed heartily at his jests, she did not take offense. Instead, she recognized an opportunity. It was as if she were standing at the edge of a battlefield, observing her opponent before making her move. The confidence she exuded spoke volumes, revealing a deep well of strength beneath her calm exterior. A subtle smile played on her lips as she reached the bar, where she leaned casually against the polished wood. To those watching, it appeared she was merely settling in for a drink, but her expression reflected something deeper, a silent agreement to engage in this unspoken duel of words. She knew that true strength often lay in restraint, and by not reacting in anger, she proved that she was not easily shaken. "Next time, maybe you could point out my other great qualities," she called out in a warm tone, her voice smooth and even amidst the drunken laughter. The room fell briefly silent, surprised by her composed response, and a ripple of intrigue swept through the crowd. It was a simple yet powerful moment that left everyone on edge, waiting to see how this unexpected turn would unfold. The general eyed her curiously, momentarily taken aback by her calmness and eloquence. It was clear that she was allowing his jest to bounce off her like a shield made of steel, demonstrating a confidence that was difficult to ignore. This was not merely a woman who had wandered into their revelry. She was someone with a quiet strength that promised to challenge him in ways he had not anticipated. Slowly, other patrons began to shift their focus from the general to her. Drawn in by her unwavering resolve, whispers filled the air as they speculated about who she might truly be beneath her serene facade. With each passing second, It became increasingly evident that this encounter would not conclude with easy laughter or simple mockery. Instead, it held the potential for an intriguing exchange between two powerful forces locked in an unexpected clash. The tavern, vibrant with laughter and jests just moments ago, now crackled with a different kind of energy. As the general's mockery hung in the air, the atmosphere shifted. The patrons began to sense an undercurrent of tension that almost felt tangible. It was as if the lively wooden beams that supported the roof were holding their breath, waiting to see how this odd standoff would unfold. Eyes darted back and forth between the general, still eager and boisterous, and the woman, who stood confidently at the bar as if she were a rock against the crashing waves of his arrogance. Her unwavering demeanor contrasted sharply with his loud bravado, creating a push and pull effect in the room. While he laughed and gestured grandly, she remained composed, her silence echoing louder than his taunts ever could. Whispers circulated like wildfire among the tavern's patrons. Some exchanged glances filled with intrigue, while others seemed uneasy about how far this contest of wills might go. "What's her story?" one soldier murmured to his friend, pointing subtly toward her. "Look at how she holds herself," came another murmur from a group huddled near the fire. Many were captivated by this unexpected spectacle. They felt drawn into an unspoken duel that heightened their sense of drama. The general's jests grew increasingly exaggerated, fueled by his desire to prove dominance before his audience. "You know," he exclaimed with a sweeping gesture, "if we had a contest of wit tonight, I'd still bet my gold on my trusty steed." His statement drew chuckles once more, but even those laughs felt nervous now. They were tinged with uncertainty. Unfazed by his antics, the woman's expression began to shift subtly. A hint of a smile danced at the corner of her lips, yet it invited no further jabs. It was as if she was surveying her surroundings while calculating her next move in this battle of words. Patrons leaned closer, drawn into this growing tension. They could sense that something monumental might emerge from this seemingly simple encounter. As moments passed like hours, it became evident that neither party was willing to back down. The ebb and flow of laughter faded into murmurs encased in palpable anticipation. This wasn't just about mockery anymore. It was about respect and strength intertwined, the kind that reveled in challenge rather than shied away from it. The air thickened dramatically as eyes locked onto hers, a challenge hanging unspoken between them as they stood worlds apart, yet tied together in confrontation. With every heartbeat echoing in time with anxious anticipation, it seemed clear something would soon shift within these tavern walls, a storm building behind calm facades and hidden depths. The room hung in a thick silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire, as patrons leaned in closer, caught between anticipation and uncertainty. The general, momentarily caught off guard by the woman's steady gaze, leaned back slightly, his bravado waning just enough to reveal interest tinged with trepidation. Then, without a word, she stepped closer, her movements deliberate and fluid, like a panther stalking its prey. The tavern seemed to hold its breath as she drew nearer to the general, her presence commanding respect despite his earlier triumph. As she approached, her tall figure eclipsed the nearby flickering candlelight, casting a brief shadow over the table where he sat surrounded by his captivated audience. With a slight inclination of her head, she lowered herself just enough to ensure only he could hear. "You think you're fearless here," she whispered softly but firmly, her voice steady and low. The noise around them muted even more, as if the tavern itself wanted to eavesdrop on this moment. But I have a story worth telling, a story that begins with 8. The general's expression faltered for just an instant. Surprise flickered in his eyes before he masked it with skepticism. 8. The patrons nearby were straining to hear, their curiosity piqued by her cryptic statement. "What do you mean?" he managed to ask, his confident tone failing to mask an undercurrent of apprehension. 8 lives taken, she continued without hesitation, in battles fought not for glory, but for survival. Each word she spoke was laden with weight. Her calm delivery only intensified the impact of her confession. The laughter that had filled the tavern moments before now seemed distant, like echoes fading into the storm outside. Gasps trickled through the crowd as they processed her claim. Was this a mere jest? Or was there truth hiding behind those eyes and that steady voice? The look upon the general's face shifted as he began to fathom that this was no ordinary confrontation. She was declaring herself not just as someone who could endure ridicule, but also as someone who had faced real danger. The atmosphere crackled with tension, shifting from playful banter to something far more serious. Patrons exchanged glances filled with intrigue and fascination. They were witnessing a moment that could very well shape the course of their evening, a fleeting but profound change that had rippled through the crowd like electricity seeking grounded earth. Eyes narrowed as the general realized he may have underestimated her after all. A challenge lay unspoken between them now. A challenge not just of words but of wills. A battle won not on a field of war, but in the very heart of the tavern itself. In that single moment of vulnerability beneath her calm facade, an undeniable shift had taken place. They were no longer mere entertainers in a lively bar, but rather 2 formidable forces poised for either conflict or understanding. The tavern fell into a stunned silence, the lively chatter and laughter fading like echoes in a distant canyon. The general's bravado, which had been so tenacious moments before, now hung in the air like a cloud of smoke, thick and suffocating. His eyes widened in disbelief as he processed the weight of her revelation. 8 lives taken. It was an assertion that rattled him to his core, shattering the confidence he had worn like armor. He stared at her, searching her gaze for any hint of exaggeration or jest, but all he found was an unyielding calmness that sent a shiver down his spine. The intensity of her eyes seemed to pierce through him, stripping away his bravado and laying bare his own vulnerabilities. This was not merely a woman he could dismiss with laughter. She was a force to be reckoned with, someone who had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. The patrons around them exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion and then to awe. They could sense the shift in power dynamics. The general's laughter had been silenced, leaving behind an emptiness filled only by the crackling of the fire. The atmosphere shifted dramatically as they realized this was no longer just entertainment. This was real. "What do you mean?" he finally managed to ask, his voice faltering slightly as uncertainty crept into his tone. It felt foreign to him. He was used to commanding respect and instilling fear with mere words. Yet here he stood, confronted by someone whose presence demanded acknowledgement. The woman held his gaze steady, a small but confident smile playing on her lips as if she relished the moment. "I mean exactly what I said," she replied, her voice unwavering. "Each life taken transformed me. They were battles fought not for glory, but for survival." Her words resonated through the stillness, each syllable weighing heavy in the space between them. The general's mind raced as he tried to reconcile this new information with the image he had constructed of her, a mere target for mockery. Now she stood before him as an enigma wrapped in layers of experience and strength that he had never anticipated. The realization that he may have misjudged her struck him harder than any blow received on the battlefield. A ripple of tension coursed through the crowd as they witnessed this clash unfold before them. Two powerful figures locked in a moment that would define their evening. The whispers began again, this time filled with intrigue rather than laughter. Patrons leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear more from the woman who had turned the tide with just a few carefully chosen words. In that charged silence, it became clear. They were no longer merely participants in a game. They were rivals entwined in a struggle that would either elevate them both or plunge them into conflict. The stakes had risen significantly, and all eyes were now on them, waiting for what would come next in this unexpected showdown at the bar. As the weight of the woman's revelation settled over the tavern, reactions from the crowd began to ripple through the room like a stone thrown into a still pond. Some patrons leaned forward, eyes wide with awe, their minds racing to grasp the gravity of her words. Whispers of disbelief mingled with murmurs of admiration, as stories of her past life began to take shape in their imaginations. Faces that had once been painted with amusement now reflected a mix of respect and curiosity, drawn to the undeniable strength she exuded. "Did you hear that? 8 lives!" One soldier whispered to his companion, his voice barely a breath above the stillness. "That's more than most would ever dream of facing." The other nodded slowly, a newfound respect dawning on him as he glanced at the woman, realizing she was not merely an object of jest, but a warrior in her own right. Yet not everyone was quick to embrace this shift. In the back corner, a group of rowdy soldiers exchanged skeptical glances, their laughter now replaced by uncertainty. "She's just trying to impress us," one barked dismissively. "Anyone can make wild claims." His voice held an edge of defiance, attempting to cling to the bravado that had characterized the evening until now. But even he felt the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on him, a crack in his confidence that he couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, the general himself remained momentarily speechless, grappling with the unexpected realization that this woman was far more formidable than he had presumed. Patrons caught glimpses of his shifting expression. The confusion mingled with an uncharacteristic humility that rarely surfaced beneath his bravado. The very air around him seemed to vibrate with tension as he processed her words, wondering how he would respond without further undermining his authority. As silence enveloped the tavern, it became clear that everyone was hanging on the precipice of this encounter, waiting for either the general or the woman to break the spell. While some were captivated by her strength and poise, others remained anchored in skepticism, unsure if they could fully trust her claim. The energy in the room was charged, an electric current flowing between the audience and the two figures at its center, drawing them all into an unspoken challenge. The crowd held collective breaths as they sensed they were witnessing a pivotal moment that would redefine the evening's narrative. Would laughter give way to respect? Would bravado crumble in the face of undeniable strength? Eager eyes looked back and forth between the general and the woman, searching for signs of how this unfolding drama would resolve. Whatever path lay ahead, one thing was certain. The tavern had transformed from a stage for mere amusement into a battleground of wills, a place where courage and confidence would clash, forever altering its history. The tavern remained hushed, the tension palpable as all eyes turned to the woman, eager to hear her story. She took a deep breath, her gaze steadying on the crowd before her. "You want to know how I earned my kill count?" she began, her voice echoing lightly through the stillness. "It isn't a tale of glory nor triumph. It's a stark reminder of survival in a world where life hangs by a thread." The patrons leaned closer, captivated by the way her tone shifted from confident to almost somber, as if she was returning to a place within herself that was buried deep. "I come from a land ravaged by conflict, where survival isn't guaranteed by honor or valor, but rather by sheer will and brute force." Her words painted a vivid picture for those listening, of harsh landscapes marked by battles fought not for pride, but out of necessity. "Each life I took," she continued, her expression resolute, "was not glorified. It was a decision made in the heat of desperation. When my village was attacked by marauders, I became an unwilling participant in the chaos. The first life I took was in self-defense, a young man poised to strike me down. It felt surreal. The weight of his life ending rested heavily on my conscience." She paused momentarily, allowing the reality of her experiences to settle over her audience like a heavy fog. "The further I traveled," she went on, "the more I faced choices that would lead me down this path, the choice to fight back or to perish." Each word rang true as she recounted moments where she had relied solely on her instincts, while escaping danger and protecting those who could not protect themselves. She spoke of allies lost along the way and relationships forged under duress. "At times," she admitted quietly, "the guilt has haunted me like a specter, each name etched into my memory, reminding me that these were lives lost in their own right." The crowd seemed transfixed, their bravado wavering as they empathized with the weight of her experiences. As voices whispered amongst themselves, there was unity in their growing respect for her bravery and candor. They now viewed her not just as an individual boasting about survival, but as someone who had carried tangible loss and regret alongside her strength. With each passing moment, it became clear that she was neither ashamed nor proud of her past actions. Instead, she owned them as part of her journey, a complex narrative worthy of acknowledgement. Silence enveloped the room again as they recognized that what lay before them was more than just entertainment. It was an exchange of truths that bridged the chasm between mere existence and genuine understanding. Wary yet awestruck gazes exchanged around the bar signaled that this woman had truly transformed the atmosphere, elevating them all beyond mockery into a place where respect might flourish amidst shared humanity. In that instant, every patron held their breath, confronted with their own perceptions and realities as they stood on the precipice between past judgments and newfound admiration. As the weight of the woman's story hung heavily in the air, the general felt an unexpected shift within himself. The once boisterous bravado that had defined him moments earlier began to wane, replaced by a burgeoning humility he had never truly faced. He glanced around the tavern at the captivated faces of the patrons, realizing the power of her words had resonated far beyond himself. The laughter that had filled the room just moments ago was now replaced with reverence, an awareness that shifted his perspective entirely. Every chuckle and jab he'd thrown her way suddenly felt shallow, empty, and misguided in the light of her truth. How foolish he had been to mock someone who had endured so much, who had taken lives not out of malice but as a means of survival. His heart sank as he acknowledged his error. It was a staggering realization that rocked him to his core. He found himself searching her gaze, a flicker of respect igniting within him. Here was a woman who had faced fear and conquered it with determination and resilience, traits he thought only he embodied in his military life. Now those qualities seemed even more profound when viewed through the lens of her harrowing experiences. "I was wrong," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself more than to her. The hush in the tavern allowed his admission to cut through the stillness like a thunderbolt. He could see that the crowd was waiting for his potential rebuttal or further jests. What they received instead was authenticity. "I misjudged you," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability spilling from his mouth. "You are a warrior in your own right, and I realize now that my jests only belittled what you have truly faced." The patrons exchanged glances, surprise evident in their eyes as they absorbed this rare moment of humility from the general. It was a sight few had ever thought they'd witness. The man who commanded respect was now offering it unreservedly, recognizing the strength that resided in the very person he had sought to undermine. Her eyes softened as she regarded him, acknowledging the sincerity etched in his expression. Perhaps there was more to him than she had first perceived as well. In this exchange, one marked by vulnerability and honesty, a new evolution took root between them. The challenge that had characterized their initial encounter began to transform into something deeper: mutual respect. Around them, whispers of admiration rippled through the crowd as they began to perceive the change in energy. The laughter and mockery were left behind as they embraced a more profound connection, recognizing courage not only in battle but in the willingness to acknowledge faults and learn from them. For the general, this moment held greater value than any victory on a distant battlefield. It was a transformation that shook foundations and opened hearts. The tavern was no longer merely a place of revelry, but now stood witness to a deeper understanding, not just of strength, but of humanity itself. As the general's newfound humility settled over the tavern, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Laughter and mocking jests were replaced with a profound silence, every patron hanging on to the woman's words as if they were precious gems being polished for the first time. The air was charged with unspoken admiration. No longer were they just spectators at a bar, but witnesses to a significant moment of human connection. Eyes that once glimmered with derision now sparkled with respect. One soldier leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table as he posed a question that had been on everyone's mind. "What did you do next?" he asked, an edge of curiosity in his voice that cut through the lingering silence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, with others echoing the soldier's eagerness to hear more. They were no longer interested in mocking her, but rather mesmerized by her bravery and resilience. The woman looked around at the faces before her. Those who had once laughed at her presence now regarded her with reverence. Encouraged by their attention, she felt emboldened to share more of her journey. "After I survived those first battles," she began again, "I realized I had two choices: become bitter and vengeful, or use what I learned to protect others." She recounted experiences where she used her skills not only to survive, but to help those who could not defend themselves. The crowd listened intently, captivated by tales of victories gained from mercy instead of malice. The tension from earlier dissipated like fog under the morning sun as patrons leaned closer, anticipating each revelation she unveiled. Warriors and townsfolk alike exchanged glances filled with understanding. They recognized that strength can manifest in many forms, not simply in physical prowess, but also in compassion and wisdom earned through hardship. As stories flowed from her lips like a stream of honesty, questions arose in hushed tones among the audience about battles fought beyond mere physical confrontations. Confrontations against fear, doubt, and despair itself. "Have you ever thought about returning home?" someone asked softly. The woman paused as memories danced in her eyes, both sweet and painful, and answered thoughtfully about forgiveness and healing that must occur within oneself before one can truly return. The tavern buzzed with energy fueled by a blend of admiration and renewed interest, urging other patrons to engage more deeply. They began asking questions out of genuine intrigue rather than skepticism or mockery, a transformation that filled the space with warmth. In this new light, laughter found its way back into conversations, but it was laughter heightened by respect rather than derision, a collective understanding that elevated them all together. The atmosphere thickened with camaraderie as strangers began to bond over shared experiences rather than differences. What had started as an ordinary night turned into something unforgettable, a communion between people whose lives might have otherwise never intersected. The bar transformed from a mere establishment into a sanctuary of stories, each person leaving behind their preconceptions and embracing newfound connections forged in humanity's shared struggles and triumphs. The atmosphere in the tavern had transformed into something profound. As the woman concluded her story, a stillness enveloped the room, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the soft clinking of mugs set down on tables. Patrons who had once giggled at her expense now sat with rapt attention, their expressions filled with respect and admiration for her journey and resilience. The general, seated at the center of this new dynamic, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He pushed back his chair slightly, standing up to address the crowd. "I've spent my life thinking that strength is measured by victories on the battlefield," he began, his voice steady yet tinged with humility. "But tonight I've learned that true strength is also found in survival and compassion." His words hung in the air, resonating with everyone present. The woman met his gaze, and for a moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition that they both carried burdens, albeit different ones. The general continued, "You have shown us all what it means to fight when all hope seems lost. You are not just a warrior, you are a beacon of resilience." With those words, a ripple of applause broke out among the patrons. One by one, soldiers and townsfolk rose from their seats to acknowledge her bravery. The sound swelled through the tavern like music, filling the space with warmth and camaraderie. It was as if they were all united in this moment. Laughter turned into cheers and claps of encouragement. "Tell us more!" someone shouted from near the bar, breaking into enthusiastic laughter that matched the spirit of celebration blossoming around them. "What happened next?" echoed another voice, eager to hear more tales from a life so vividly painted by her earlier words. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, she smiled softly and nodded. "There's much more to share," she said, her voice carrying confidence tempered by humility. "Every encounter shaped me in ways I never anticipated." As she spoke again, recounting further stories of choices made in dire circumstances and allies forged in battle, the tavern became a sanctuary of connection. The crowd leaned in closer as they listened intently, creating an intimate space brimming with shared humanity. In that moment of storytelling and connection, boundaries began to dissolve. Differences between soldiers and townsfolk faded away as they engaged in discussions about courage and sacrifice. The general watched as people exchanged ideas, deepening their understanding of each other through her narratives. By the time she finished speaking again, it was clear that what had begun as a night marked by mockery had transformed into one of respect and unity. The tavern was no longer just a place for revelry, but a significant meeting ground where lives intertwined through shared experiences. as patrons raised their mugs high in salute to both her bravery and newfound respect for one another. The general felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any he had known before, not merely for winning battles, but for fostering connections that transcended mere words. In this space where laughter echoed alongside respect, they had created something lasting, a community forged through understanding of strength in its many forms.